Hello, I'm Kamal Santamaria. This is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, corruption. It is the global curse that's getting worse and not helped by the host of an anti-corruption summit calling his guests fantastically corrupt. We look at the effect David Cameron's comments and conference might have on the world of corruption. Also this week, Brazil and the end of the road for Dilma Rousseff. But now the Senate's voted to impeach her, there's months of further instability ahead. What chance does that give to an economy already deep in recession? And as this man takes the helm of one of Asia's strongest growing economies, we ask if he can keep the Philippines on its strong economic track. There are the corrupt, and now it seems the fantastically corrupt. With those two words, Britain's Prime Minister David Cameron sparked a diplomatic row with Afghanistan and Nigeria this past week, and just when he was about to host a global anti-corruption conference in London. You'll hear Cameron's comments in a moment, but the fact is it does highlight a pretty big problem. According to Transparency International, more than 1 in 4 people across the globe has paid a bribe when interacting with key public institutions and services. In little more than a decade, more than $12 trillion was siphoned out of emerging economies. More than 6 billion people live in countries with a serious corruption problem. Remember, there's only 7 billion people in the world. And some estimates place the total cost of corruption at more than 5% of global GDP. Each year, that is $2.6 trillion lost every 12 months. So we'll unpack all that in a moment with our guest, but first the incident which sparked it all. Here is Barnaby Phillips on that International Anti-Corruption Summit and the reaction to David Cameron's choice of words.
The Nigerian president thought he was coming to London as an honoured guest. Now he feels he needs to defend his country's honour after David Cameron told the Queen just what he thought of Nigeria and Afghanistan.
We've actually got some leaders of some fantastically corrupt countries coming to Britain. No, Nigeria and Afghanistan, possibly the two most corrupt countries.
But President Buhari believes countries like Britain should do more to return stolen wealth to Nigeria. So, does he want the British to say sorry?
I'm not going to demand any apology from anybody. What I'm demanding is the return of assets.
The president agreed. Nigeria does have an enormous problem with corruption. But back home in Nigeria and in Afghanistan, what do they think about all this?
Nigeria is rebranding every day. Even if we were once corrupt, now we are rebranding. And I think we'll get there as soon as possible.
We can all see it. Our cabinet and political leaders are appointed by the Americans and other powerful Western countries, and yet they blame us for corruption?
Meanwhile, in Parliament, David Cameron was being asked whether Britain would be making its overseas territories more transparent in their financial dealings.
Well, first of all, I better check the microphones on before speaking. It's probably a good idea. This government has done more than any previous government to deal with this issue of making sure that our overseas territories and crown dependencies are not tax havens but behave in a responsible way.
David Cameron has unintentionally provoked a big debate about where the responsibility for corruption lies, in the developing world or here in the developed world. Ironically, his unfortunate remarks may have helped make these meetings more productive than they would otherwise have been. Some 50 countries were invited to London. Is this enough to achieve progress when corruption permeates the whole world?
If you get enough countries, then you can make quite substantial change. But particularly when you're looking at illicit financial flows, the result will be that there's a rump of countries where it's clear the dirty money is going. So actually you achieve your objective if you get a critical mass of countries that want to be clean.
Britain hopes that more countries will join the Open Government Declaration, a commitment to greater transparency. Nigeria, says President Buhari, is ready to sign up.
So let's discuss this further. In London for us is a British Member of Parliament, Nigel Mills, who's also a member of a cross-party group which works to strengthen the UK's anti-corruption policies. Mr. Mills, it was the Panama Papers, I think, which was the thing which really cued the public outrage before this conference. How do you feel the response has been in that time? Have governments, are they on the right track, do you think?
Well, I think there was plenty of outrage before we had the leak of those papers, and this summit was arranged long before that leak. But I think what those leaks showed is exactly how widespread this level of corrupt and tax evading activity was, and really it showed everybody around the world the extent to which it penetrates all aspects of global business and activity. So I think it really has raised this right up the agenda, and I think that's hopefully why we'll see some real concrete actions being agreed at the summit today.
What would you actually want done? Because it could fall into either of two camps. A, this shouldn't be happening, period, or B, if it is happening legally, then we need to know about it. There needs to be a level of transparency. Which of those do you fall into, or both?
It shouldn't be happening, and the way we can try and make sure it doesn't happen, or at least it happens a lot less, is by having the transparency. You know, having all the territories which allow people who've stolen money to hide it there to have to show who's forming companies, who really owns those companies, and trusts around the world, so that law authorities and campaigners and charities can actually go and see who's owning those companies. And if we know there's some individual who we think has stolen money somewhere, it can be much easier to go and track where that money's gone, where it's sitting, and get it back. So it's both of those things. It's stopping it, and the way you stop it is by making it harder to hide the money.
Right, okay. Let's move on to the actual anti-corruption summit in London and some of the, quote, fantastically corrupt countries that attended. The first thing I noticed amid all the furor was that the Nigerian president didn't deny any of this, did he? He actually said, yes, we are corrupt, and that's got to be half the battle won, doesn't it? The fact that he knows it's a problem and he does want to do something about it.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think we've been hiding this or pussyfooting around it for far too long. You know, there are a lot of countries in the world that are really quite horribly corrupt, and there needs to be action taken. But it's right that the UK takes a lead, and we also say we're not perfect. You know, there are issues with the City of London, there are issues with property being owned in London by people who are buying that with stolen money, and we need to make sure we've got every rule in place and all those rules being enforced to stop that.
What about the fact that the UK, and well, other countries will as well, but I'll use the UK as an example here, gives a lot of foreign aid money to these countries? You know, you look at the numbers, there are billions of dollars given to Nigeria, billions of dollars given to Afghanistan. How do you continue to justify all of that when these countries are apparently so corrupt?
Well, I think many of my voters will be very concerned that we're giving lots of money to countries where there's some suggestion that either that money or other money is being stolen by people it's not intended for. But I suppose the fact that we are one of the few countries that meet our 0.7% aid target means we do have the authority to say, look, we're giving this amount of money, we need you to get your house in order and start tackling this properly. And that's why it's so welcome that these countries have chosen to come to this summit. They didn't have to, and show that they are serious about trying to tackle corruption in their countries. And it is their money being stolen that makes it hard for them to pay the public services that we want them to have.
Mr. Mills, I believe you and some of your colleagues wrote a letter to the Prime Minister, your own party leader, urging him to tackle this. What did you say in that letter?
Well, the key thing we want to see is a real action, and I think the lead we need to take is to make sure our overseas territories and Crown dependencies are taking a lead and actually publishing the registers of who owns the companies and trusts that are established in those territories. The UK is one of the first countries to do that. We'll have that later this year, and we now need to make sure that those territories that we have some influence over are taking the lead, because as we saw in the Panama Papers, you know, something like 80% of the shell companies that are formed in our overseas territories. So that's the key thing. The government have said they want to see that happen. The territories have gone as far as saying they'll have the registers and they'll let security authorities access them. But what we want to see is those things in the public domain, so we can all see who's got what money where and why. And then issue a challenge to legitimate companies and individuals around the world. If you're using clean money, use a jurisdiction which is clean and transparent. If you go and use one that won't comply with these rules, that doesn't want to be transparent, then we'll all have to assume you've got something to hide.
Just a final thought then. Are you confident this issue can actually be kept in the spotlight? As you said earlier, rightly, it was prominent before the Panama Papers and before this summit happened. But you also know, I'm sure, how the news cycle works and the fact that these things can inevitably fall away from public view. What will you do? What do you believe should be done to keep these issues bubbling along and keep them active?
Well, I think the issue of global tax avoidance, of tax evasion, of corruption has been rumbling along pretty steadily now for a few years. It doesn't show any signs of dying down with the news cycle. But I think it's why there's a need for this summit to produce some real concrete actions and find a way of making sure those actions are actually taken. We don't just want to see warm words and platitudes which can drift away when the news cycle's gone. So I think it is something that we should all keep on the agenda, keep pressing global leaders on. I mean, the Americans are here, they've sent their Secretary of State, there's real issues with transparency in states like Delaware, so there is action here for big countries and little ones to take, and I think it's down to people like me in all these countries to keep the issue on the agenda and keep challenging our governments to make sure it actually, the actions that are promised today actually take place.
British MP Nigel Mills, pleasure talking to you today. Thank you. And still ahead on Counting the Cost is a man dubbed the Punisher, the right man to lead the Philippines. Well, the voters certainly think so. We'll see what the economists think a little later on. Before that, though, Brazil, where it is now official, President Dilma Rousseff will be impeached for allegedly using bookkeeping tricks to cover a budget deficit, allegations she has always refuted. Nevertheless, this man, Vice President Michel Temer, will take over until the end of the trial, and perhaps even until the end of this presidential tenure in 2018. He's a centre-right leader with a massive job ahead, not just economically, but also the scandal at the state oil company Petrobras, which tainted a number of officials, including Mr. Temer himself.
My first announcement to the Brazilian people is the word trust. Trust in the values that ultimately shape the character of our people, the vitality of our democracy. Trust in the ability of our national economy to recover, of the great potential our country harbors in our social and political institutions, and in the ability that we, united, can take on any challenge, the challenges of the present, which is unquestionably a very difficult moment.
So the concern is that all this fresh uncertainty will play havoc with an economy already in the worst recession in decades. Both the IMF and the World Bank predict the economy in Brazil will shrink 3.8% this year, just like last year. Previous predictions were only 1%. Brazil's currency, the real, has lost nearly half its value in the last 4 years, which in turn has caused a spike in inflation, 10.7% at the end of last year, which incidentally is almost the same as the current unemployment rate. Such a change from the extraordinary economic progress of a decade ago, which lifted 29 million people out of poverty. Gustavo Hangel's with us now, chief economist for Latin America with ING Global Markets in New York. Look, Gustavo, it's been such a tumultuous time for Brazil, culminating now with Dilma Rousseff being suspended and facing impeachment. The number one thing which economies and markets hate is uncertainty, which is what we've had for a long time. I mean, is that going to change at all?
That's absolutely correct. And what we have now is really an improvement on that scenario, meaning we now have much greater clarity that Rousseff is clearly out. There is still a pending vote in the Senate, but given the score that we have in the Senate, there were 55 senators voting for her impeachment, and the second vote that may take place in the next few months only requires 54. So you already surpassed that minimum threshold, which really gives the markets a greater certainty that Rousseff will eventually be formally impeached, meaning Michel Temer is going to be Brazil's president until 2018. And that is very positive news for the market.
Okay, then explain to me, though, how that is positive news. Because, well, not just for the stability factor, but because of, well, what I'm saying is, do we have an indication of where he wants to take Brazil?
What we know so far is that he will appoint Henrique Meirelles as finance minister, which is an extremely positive announcement. Henrique Meirelles is very well regarded by the market, very respected, former central bank president of Brazil. So that is certainly very positive. We also know the names, some names for the economic team, like the central bank president and head of the treasury, that are also likely to be well received by the market in general. And the other point is the economic program. There is not a whole lot we know about that. There is great consensus about what needs to take place, meaning Brazil has a very substantial fiscal problem, so we need to have a social security reform. We need to cut spending. I expect initial measures to reflect that.
Such a huge job, though, isn't it, Gustavo? I mean, not the impact that this whole scandal has had on the entire Brazilian economy in the last year or so, and just that whole decline from the boom Lula days. I just wonder really about the long-term damage which has been done to the whole Brazilian economy and how it can really recover.
The whole, as you said, is enormous. For instance, the fiscal accounts, the fiscal budget, you need to come up with approximately 5 percentage points of GDP in terms of spending cuts or tax hikes. 5 percentage points of GDP when the economy is contracting like 4% this year is an extremely challenging thing to do. So the ability for the market to react has been surprisingly fast. There is a huge pipeline of infrastructure investments that need to be auctioned in terms of public-private partnerships. So there's a lot of things on the pipeline that could be put to work or facilitated very quickly, and somehow, you know, Brazil can recover a bit faster. As you probably know, interest rates in Brazil are extremely high, 14.25 right now, the policy rate. And if the government is able to achieve success in the fiscal agenda, meaning there is significant advancement in the fiscal austerity program, that would open the door for the monetary policy, for the central bank to start cutting interest rates quite substantively.
You know, Gustavo, you are sounding very confident and positive here. I just worry again about things like, say, the price of oil and how that will affect things. As long as there are external factors affecting Brazil, that would continue to hamper the country. Or maybe I'm just being negative.
Well, oil prices are not as important to Brazil as they are, for instance, to Mexico, where they are super important for fiscal accounts. A lot of government revenues come from oil revenues of the oil company, or Colombia. In the case of Brazil, oil revenues are not necessarily a significant factor for fiscal accounts. There is an indirect impact here, which is Petrobras, because Petrobras is a state-owned enterprise, and the company has suffered tremendously and will continue to suffer tremendously from the fact that it has been forced to subsidize consumption of gasoline in Brazil. But that is changing. So I think the oil price situation is a problem for Petrobras, and whether that becomes a problem for the government and for the rest of the economy, it remains to be seen. Petrobras needs to sell assets, needs to improve its finances through many different means, which are different from necessarily oil prices or different from like a bailout from the government. So oil prices is a factor for Petrobras specifically, not necessarily, at least initially, for the government or even for Brazil in general.
Gustavo Rangel from ING Global in New York. Thank you for joining us. Finally this week, a change at the top in the Philippines. Controversial candidate Rodrigo Duterte will be the next president. Controversial because of things like his hardline approach to crime. He talks about killing suspected criminals without trial. He also wants a nighttime curfew for under 18s and a nationwide ban on serving alcohol after midnight. What's all this going to do to what is a very successful Asian economy? Well, rapid but inclusive growth is what the last government called it, along with increasing employment and reducing poverty. Now, according to the World Bank, the Philippines is the third fastest growing regional economy after China and Vietnam, with 6.1% growth forecast this year. That's after average growth of more than 5% over the past 10 years. Domestic spending power has been boosted by remittances from foreign workers, many of them here in the Gulf, which ends up accounting for around 10% of the total economy. And unemployment fell to a decade low of 5.7% in 2015. All in all, it's a very positive economic story. But can the incoming government maintain all of that? Let's talk to Ruben Mondejar. He's a professor at the City University of Hong Kong, where he's director of the Master's Program in Global Business Management. Ruben, as we've outlined, the numbers in the Philippines look good, certainly under the reign of Benigno Aquino. What do you think we can expect from this incoming government when it comes to the basics of the economy and maintaining that strong economy?
the basics of the economy actually began in the previous administration, the one previous to the Aquino administration. So we are actually beginning with the year 2000. That was the time when Gloria Arroyo began to put the fundamentals. So in other words, to put it in summary, the Aquino administration actually just reaped the benefits. He was harvesting the foundations that were put in place by Gloria Arroyo. And he was quite lucky. Everything went well, and so the growth track continued. So he was growing, the economy was growing under his watch at about 6.5%. But remember that in the time of Gloria Arroyo, it was also growing at that rate. So it's not really his doing that the economy went well. Now, what will happen in the next presidency? He's not going to undo that because I think the fundamentals are there. So for example, from 10 to 12 million people, so it's about 10% of the population, are sending in about 12% of GDP. So, and then another 6 to 7% are being contributed by business processing operations. So there's already a big foundation, and I don't think he will be doing something crazy to undo what is already functioning very well. So I think all told, the administration of the elected new president will continue the growth track.
No, that makes, I think, entire sense that he would do that. However, did he outline anything during the campaign process which gave us any strong idea about any sort of changes he would actually like to make?
Well, he won because the people were angry at the two things that Aquino did not do, which was to solve the problem of criminality and the problem of poverty. So these two basically were the reasons why this new president came into power. You know, apart from that, he was, this new president has been successful in running the city of Davao in the south. But you know, it's not so easy to translate a success in one city to make it another success for the whole country. So that will be a big challenge. So he doesn't have actually experience in economic planning or economic management, but you know, he will surround himself with advisors. And we already know he has already brought up some names which are respected names who will be his advisors. So I don't discount the possibility that he will really do a good job.
Can I get some thoughts from you on the makeup of the Philippines economy? Not so much the numbers, but the things which drive those numbers and that growth. I wonder if there's enough strength across different parts of the economy to keep it going. We've already outlined how there is so much dependence on remittances. Is the economy well balanced enough?
Well, the Philippines is #1 in coconut. So it's the world's largest supplier of coconut oil, coconut palm, and every derivative from coconut. However, that's not enough. You see, we have 40% of the population is considered poor. So they're under the poverty line. So, but anyway, what's going well for the Philippines is that, look, there's a maturity of institutions. That's the reason why we had these elections, and it was relatively clean, relatively non-violent. So it was this is one good advantage of the Philippines. In other words, investors come because they see that democracy is working. Will he become a dictator? Well, the new constitution that was put in place after the debacle of the Marcos regime is so tightly knit that it's very hard for a dictator to take over. So that's again one good thing about the Philippines. I think whatever he said during the elections will not be what he will say as president. And he needed to say those things because he needed to catch the psyche of the Filipinos, of the electorate. But now that he is president, he will sober up. So I think that he is a mature man, and he knows that he is now in charge of over 100 million people and 7,100 islands. So he will be very careful what he says now. He just said this morning that he's going to the Vatican to meet the Pope to apologize for all the things that he has said negatively about the Pope. So that's just an indication of what is going to be his administration.
Ruben Mondejar, thank you for your time. And that is our show for this week, but there's more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. It'll take you straight to our page with individual reports, links and entire episodes for you to catch up on. You can also get in touch with us. You can tweet me at KamalAJE. Do use the hashtag AJCTC when you do, or just drop us an email. countingthecost@aljazeera.net is the address. That is it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Kamal Santamaria from the whole team. Thanks for joining us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.